Greetings! It is I, Yi Bargoon. I have returned. Hopefully you're here because you've finished watching my Learn to Trigger Basics series. If you haven't and would like to learn how to trigger, I'd recommend you start there. This is the Learn to Trigger Intermediate series. We'll be learning some more advanced trigger tricks throughout this series in the hopes of expanding your trigger horizons. So, to make sure we're at the right place, let me ask you a question. This is going to do with how triggers behave. So I've gone into the triggers, and what I'm going to do, very simply, going to create a trigger and have a quest var modify, where quest var 1 gets modified by +1 every loop. What I'm then going to have in a separate trigger, also looping, is I'm going to have that quest var print out. So we know what's going to happen. We're going to get a display of quest var 1 ticking down on the left side of the screen in ever-increasing values. My question to you is, what will be the first number in this sequence? Let's have a look and see. So, right at the top here, we find that the quest var started as 1. You might be asking yourself, why this did not start at 0? It's all to do with the order of the triggers. In order to progress with this series, we've got to have a greater understanding of how triggers work, and I like to think of them all as running in separate lines of code. Every frame of the game, your trigger code will be running from start to finish in its entirety. So the game starts with the quest var modify, because it's earlier in the sequence, and then it echoes the quest var modify. So if we copy that, change the name so it makes sense, it's now going to be lower down the sequence. What's going to happen here if we start with the echo and then we modify? You'll see this time we did start at 0. I hope this now makes sense in how you can think of triggers running as sort of lines of command code on a page that will run every single time in the exact order specified. This is why the order of your triggers can make a difference, because some triggers, if you're using trigger loaders, may require that the trigger loader is the very first trigger. You'd struggle to do that if you've got a huge array of triggers, but all you do is find the very first trigger, copy it, so you're moving it down to the end of the page, and then you've got your first trigger here, and you can put your trigger effect in there to load the trigger loader. We're going to expand on this now and look at conditional effects. The reason I've started with this should become quite clear, as we're about to use this principle and go into much more detail. So, you may have seen conditional effects already. This will require a download. I'll link this in the description, but Noted has made these large array of effects here, which are all prefixed with conditional, and you'll see, looking through this, they match the conditions which you can have if you want to look at the conditions tab. They're all fairly similar there. So, how would we use them? What's the point of them, and why are they useful? Let's say at 5 seconds I want chats to display if certain villagers are dead. Now, the old-fashioned way of doing this is to have a timer with 5 seconds, and then for every single villager we'd have an is dead. We'd have a chat saying that so-and-so is dead, and that would be how it would work. However, you'd have to copy this over 4 times for each of the 4 villagers, and it can get a bit tedious. You can make mistakes and things can go wrong. So the better way of doing this is at 5 seconds this trigger will activate, but now let's use the conditionals. So when I've put a conditional, I've essentially had an open bracket for my villager to be dead, and then we will send a chat which notifies the player of the death. If I playtest this scenario at the moment, I'm going to get a trigger lock and everything will not work. The reason for that is because I've opened a bracket haven't closed a bracket. It's much the same way if you're making syntax and left your brackets or your tags unclosed. So what we need to do now is close the bracket by going to conditional z end. Then once we're in the same trigger, we can copy this along. So now we're checking each of the first two villagers. We can copy again. Again, we've got to be very careful with our order here and when our brackets open and when our brackets close, because if we copy wrong, we have to start again. There's no other way of doing this because AOM doesn't let us move our effects up and down, unfortunately. So this will now be a working trigger as I've closed all my brackets and I've done everything I wanted to. So let's kill 3 of our villagers, and you'll see that we've got the printout saying that 3 of them are dead. If we then kill the 4th, we don't get a printout. Reason for that one is, again, this just fires at the 5 timer and it runs once. It's not looped, so after it's finished running, that trigger never runs again. With conditional effects, you can expand on this quite a lot, so you can have conditional in areas for shops, especially if you're looping it. One of the things you will have noticed in here is you've actually got timer in the condition here, and you might be wondering how that one works. So let's do a little demonstration to show you. So just going to tidy up all my brackets by deleting everything, and we'll have a conditional timer now. So I'm going to set this to a value of 2. I'm going to close my brackets. I pressed insert there because then I can just change this one and maintain my order. So I can do it that way. It's slightly better for me to build it this way. So what's this going to look like? When the villager is dead, there will be a conditional timer that has our chat. So if we delete our villager very early, before that timer, you'll see that even after we've expended that timer, nothing's happening. If we're going again, and we're waiting a little bit this time, and now deleting our villager, we do get the timer. But hang on, you might ask, this is set to timer 2, and I didn't do it bang on 2, so why has it happened? This essentially means if the timer is equal to or greater than 2. So it could happen at 2 seconds, but it could also happen at 4 seconds, it could also happen at 400 seconds. We've got different ways of closing our brackets as well. So we've got the normal conditional Z ends, which will close brackets. We've also got a few other triggers here with else and else if. So what I'm going to do is put an else there and just say Dave is dead early, and then I'm going to end. So you might think I've got my brackets open there, I'm closing it, and then I'm opening another bracket and closing it there. If we test the scenario, we get the results there. So you may now be thinking, what the hell is going on there? So this trigger has a condition is dead. We got the effect here, even though Dave was still alive. So what happened there? That's just because of our syntax here. So this else actually has another closed bracket embedded in it. So what we actually did is we closed the bracket around this condition, opened a new one, and then closed it there. That's why we got this chat even though the unit was still alive. If we delete this closed bracket here, what we now have is the intended effect, where we kill our villager early and we get the early statement, or we just end up waiting a little bit and get the normal statement. Hopefully that's going to illustrate that these are actually functioning as brackets around the trigger code behind the scenes, what you don't see, and that's how AOM reads this. The else condition means that if this one is not met. So you could have anything in here, and if that were not to be true, then this effect would be running here. There's another one at the bottom where there's a conditional else if. What's going to happen if we just run this without putting anything on there?
Πρόσταγμα.
Nothing's going to happen. The reason for that one is we've got to specify another condition and then copy it over. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have that Greta is dead as well. I'm going to copy that and end it like that. I'm going to have one of these because this one closes and opens a bracket as well. So I'm going to have Dave and Becky are dead here, or it's Greta for the Norse one. So now what's going to happen when we play this?
You need to.
No effect. We've waited after 2 seconds and we're getting the standard effect there. That's because although he's dead, this condition has been met and it's true, so this is playing. This can't play even if this condition is true because this checks to make sure that this is not true. So now we can get that other text very quickly, as demonstrated there. So I'd say this is certainly worth having a play with, as we're going to be relying on this concept extensively moving forward. Nonetheless, I hope this demystifies some of these conditional effects and shows they can be quite a powerful tool for you. If you didn't really understand this and it didn't make sense, it's probably best to go back to the basic series or just have a bit more time in the editor so you understand your triggers. What I'm trying to do here is explain a little bit about how the triggers work, and that's going to be useful in our next video when we look at data types and moving on to writing our very own triggers. Until then, I look forward to seeing you next time for some Learn to Triggers in the Medium series.